let's completely shift our perspective. Instead of just seeing price as some random number on a tag, we're going to dive into the complex psychology, the raw math, and the deep strategy behind it. Because honestly, pricing is easily one of the most fascinating intersections of human behavior and competitive strategy out there. By the end of this explainer, I promise you'll be looking at every price tag around you in a completely different light.
So, to kick things right off, let's look at a staggering example: the premium price for a Peloton stationary bike. Think about this for a second. A regular run-of-the-mill stationary bike, that might set you back, what, $200 or $300? But Peloton? They're commanding a massive $1,745 upfront. Plus, they tack on an ongoing $39 a month just to access their digital network. On paper, if you're a traditional economist, this probably seems absolutely absurd.
And that brings up a really fascinating mystery. How in the world can a brand charge that much, face intense supply chain headaches and product recalls, and somehow still build this fiercely loyal community of millions who actually view the product as an absolute steal? Well, it's because they've totally redefined what their customers are actually buying. During the pandemic, Peloton saw this astronomical growth, right? But they weren't just selling metal and gears. They were selling a lifestyle. They created this massive microcultural phenomenon where users feel this incredibly powerful sense of belonging. That feeling of being connected, of being cool and innovative, that is exactly what users are happily paying for. So the really crucial takeaway here is that to truly understand pricing, we have to move way past that narrow definition, just the exact amount of money charged. We have to embrace a much broader definition. Price is actually the sum of all the value a customer gives up to gain a benefit. And remember this, out of all the things a business can tweak, like the product design, the flashy ads, or the store location, price is literally the only element that actually produces revenue. Every single other thing represents a cost. Sure, it's highly flexible, but at its core, it is fundamentally a value exchange. All right, moving right into our first main concept, pricing based on value versus costs. There is a stark, absolute difference between these two ways of thinking. If you look at the internally focused cost-based approach, it starts completely with the product. A company makes something, adds up what it costs to build, slaps a standard markup on it, and then basically crosses their fingers hoping the customer thinks it's worth it. But value-based pricing, it completely flips the script. It starts with the customer's needs and what they perceive as valuable. The company figures out what the customer is willing to pay first, sets a target price, and then scrambles backwards to design a product and manage costs to hit that exact number. Because at the end of the day, the customer is always the one who decides if a price is right. Now, within this whole customer-first, value-based umbrella, companies usually take one of two paths. They might go with good value pricing. That's exactly what it sounds like, giving you a fair combination of quality and service, kind of like your everyday low prices. Or they might use value-added pricing. This is where a brand intentionally tacks on premium, differentiating features just to justify a much higher price tag. This is exactly why you're paying a massive premium for, say, a Canada Goose jacket. They aren't just tallying up the raw cost of some goose feathers and fabric, right? They're pricing based on the added value of the prestige, that extreme weather performance, and the brand's overall perception. But listen, even if a company uses value-based pricing, they can't just ignore their own costs. And if they do choose that cost-based strategy we just talked about, they absolutely have to know their math cold. Costs generally come in three distinct flavors. First, you've got fixed costs, or overhead. Think of things like warehouse rent or executive salaries. You're paying those no matter how much you actually sell. Then you have variable costs. These fluctuate directly with how much you produce, like the raw plastic and computer chips for every single tablet that rolls off an assembly line. Add those two together at any given production level, and boom, you've got your total costs. Let's look at a fantastic real-world example of break-even pricing from our sources, featuring an online retailer called Rock Bottom Golf. Imagine they decide to run a huge Father's Day promotion, slashing $100 off a premium golf driver. They spend $15,000 up front on banner ads for the sale. Now, if their margin, meaning their profit per discounted club, drops to $80, the math tells a pretty brutal truth. To simply cover that $15,000 fixed cost for the ads, they have to sell exactly 187.5, so 188 additional drivers, just to break even. If they only sell, say, 100 extra clubs, that massive promotion actually lost them money. It is a very high-stakes numbers game. This leads us perfectly to a really clever hybrid approach called target costing. It essentially bridges the gap between what the customer values and what the company spends. Here, the company decides on its absolute ideal selling price based entirely on customer value right out of the gate. Only after that do they look internally to target their manufacturing and operational costs, making sure they can actually meet that exact price tag while still turning a profit. It really forces a business to get incredibly innovative with how they build and deliver stuff. Okay, let's zoom out to Section 2, Market Forces, Demand, and Competitors. A company's freedom to set prices shrinks drastically depending on what kind of sandbox they're playing in. If you're in pure competition selling uniform commodities like, say, wheat or copper, you have almost zero pricing power. The market basically dictates the going rate. But slide all the way over to a pure monopoly, like a local regulated power company, or a historically dominant player like De Beers with diamonds, and you're the only seller setting the rules. Now, most consumer brands sit somewhere in the middle, in monopolistic competition. This is where you have lots of sellers trading over a range of prices by actively differentiating their stuff through branding. And then there's oligopolistic competition. Just a few massive sellers who watch each other's pricing moves like absolute hawks. We also absolutely have to account for the price elasticity of the demand curve. Basically, this asks a really simple question. If we bump our price up just a little bit, are all our customers going to abandon us? If the demand hardly budges, it's inelastic. Buyers are way less price sensitive when a product is really unique, super high quality, prestigious, or just doesn't have easy substitutes. But on the flip side, if a tiny price hike causes a massive nosedive in your sales, your demand is elastic. And if that's the case, you better be really, really careful about trying to squeeze more margin out of your buyers. Moving right along to Section 3, Real-World Pricing Battles, featuring a classic Gillette case study. For well over a century, Gillette absolutely dominated the shaving industry. How did they do it? With a relentless value-added pricing strategy. They just kept introducing new features. They moved from 2 blades to 3, then up to 5, and then, get this, they even started adding vibrating mechanisms and soothing gels. They produced something better, made the old product obsolete, and used those shiny new value-added attributes to justify consistent premium price hikes. And honestly, it worked flawlessly for decades, just as long as customers believed that extra blade gave them a truly superior shave. But as we know, market disruption can be incredibly harsh. Over just the past decade, Gillette's market share plummeted from a seemingly untouchable 70% down to just 50%. Why? Well, their premium pricing strategy left them wide open. They got severely undercut by lower-priced, direct-to-consumer startups that offered incredibly convenient subscription plans. Suddenly, that incremental value of a 5th blade just wasn't worth a 50% price hike in the eyes of everyday consumers. This fierce external pressure backed Gillette into a corner, forcing them to pivot towards competition-based pricing. They couldn't just rely on adding more bells and whistles anymore. They had to look hard at what those nimble startups were charging. Because consumers, they judge value relative to the alternatives. Consequently, Gillette actually had to cut their prices. They launched entirely new sub-brands and direct online sales platforms just to fight back and defend whatever market share they had left. It's a perfect textbook example of external forces totally dictating a massive shift in a company's pricing strategy. Finally, let's explore Section 4, the ethical dilemma of pricing. This brings us to a really intense real-world debate. Should airlines use a weight-based pricing model for large passengers? Our sources impartially lay out both sides of this. On one hand, proponents argue pure economics. Heavier planes literally cost more fuel to fly. Adjacent passengers who paid for their seats shouldn't be squeezed. And hey, we already charge a premium for heavier luggage, right? The logic there is strictly cost-based. But on the other hand, the arguments against this are equally compelling and deeply human. Opponents point out that this is highly discriminatory, noting that obesity can be a complex genetic or medical condition. They highlight the immense social shaming involved, not to mention the absolute logistical nightmare of trying to weigh human beings at an airport gate. We present both sides of this debate to leave you with one final thought to ponder. As you navigate the world, both as a consumer and maybe even as a business leader, ask yourself this: should we really treat human beings with the exact same cold, cost-based logic that we apply to check luggage? Or is true value and the way we assign a price to the services around us about much, much more than just the bottom line? Really think about that the next time you see a price tag. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the real value behind the numbers.